The weak complain, the intelligent analyze, and the strong act. Now I could add, yes, and the stupid rule, or the crazy ones. But that would bring me back to complaining. This brings us to the point that is existentially important for the coming months. And now I want to let you in on a little secret. I want to show you or explain what is currently happening in society and what no one has really understood so far in order to classify where we are. So we are in trends between socialism and fascism. These are the trends that are being discussed and what we actually want. Peace, happiness, and prosperity. That's somewhere in the middle between these extreme poles. But everyone is only looking at these extreme poles without understanding what they mean. Yes, we'll get to that in a moment because everyone is only looking at these extreme poles. No one is talking to each other anymore, and no one can find their way back to the middle. So first of all, a wonderful good evening. That's exactly what socialism is. Well, everyone is somehow equal. Everyone has the same. Fairness prevails. Yes, so you suggest to people that you feel most comfortable in a herd of equals, from which you don't stand out, like on a golf course where the blades of grass are all cut the same. That's where the grass is lushest. Sufficient water and fertilizer must be sprayed on the golf course every day, so to speak. This is what people do not see because it usually takes place at night. But this is how socialism, this egalitarianism, can be kept alive. In nature, this does not actually exist. In nature, we only have similar examples such as the swarm or the herd. These are examples that are actually used to suggest the idea of socialism and communism to us. What about the herd? The herd has the idea that I am protected in the herd, that I don't have to be the fastest in the herd. I don't have to be the strongest or the best. I am protected by the herd. But what no one tells you is that when a predator comes, yes, just imagine a herd of pigs or cattle or zebras in the savannah. Then the lions come and the herd runs away. And who gets caught? It's the weak, the sick, the old, or the youngest. That's what no one tells you. The herd itself does not protect you. It only gives you the feeling that you are protected and ultimately perhaps also the knowledge that you are throwing the weakest to the predators. That is exactly what happens. You can check where this mentality has taken hold here in Europe. But the problem with socialism is, and perhaps you've already thought about this, what fascism actually is. What exactly is it? There are or were several fascist governments in Europe. There were several fascist governments. One in Italy and Spain, all with different characteristics. That's why it's relatively difficult to clearly define what fascism actually is. We make it very important to understand this in this video, because we want to find our way back to the middle. So what are the characteristics of socialism? The problem is that it somehow brings people to the top who are not particularly bright, i.e., not particularly intelligent. For example, we had people like Stalin, who was said to have had an IQ of 120. At the time, that was not the highest IQ among political leaders, so it's no wonder that the tests were initially banned in the Soviet Union. But that's exactly the point. You end up with people in power who, for example, come along and say, yes, we have to pipe hydrogen through natural gas pipelines. People who can't recognize or understand that one thing is not the other, who completely ignore physical quantities and physics and believe that because they are in power, they can do anything. Godlike. Yes, so when you have people who say, we'll pipe hydrogen through natural gas pipelines, and then fail to calculate that there will be differences in brittleness and diffusion, i.e. the brittleness of the metal through which it is piped. The pipeline has different diffusion, different energy densities, that there are very different problems involved, then yes, then you are at the mercy of the quality and luck of these managers. That is also exactly why socialism has never really worked. People have been trying it out for hundreds of years, almost hundreds, but they have been trying it out for an extremely long time. It has been tried again and again, and it has failed again and again. Stalinism and Maoism have claimed millions of lives, millions of deaths, death sentences, and it has never really worked. And then people come along and say, yes, we made a mistake, we won't do that again next time. What is the problem? The problem is negative selection. If you make everyone the same, if you prevent the real achievers from achieving, if you suppress them, if you punish them through taxes, through levies, through lack of recognition, or through belittlement, you have already achieved exclusion again. Then you simply ensure that people with stupid ideas are in power and that those who perform well lose motivation. And that is why every socialist system collapses. Nature, the predators in nature, are corrective factors that ensure survival so that there is always a certain optimization, a maintenance of quality, if not an increase in quality within the group. That is what nature regulates. It regulates this in socialist as well as fascist societies, as well as in every other form of society. Sometimes we may still notice it, sometimes the cycles in which nature acts are too long. But there is always an answer and a regulation of nature. Fascism, which attempts to claim this regulation and define it itself, practices selection. Selection. That is what actually characterizes fascism. Then they practiced euthanasia. We said these and those, gone. They prescribed certain beliefs or not, or said gone. So they practiced selection in all aspects. So that is the overshooting of this idea of performance, where you then, so to speak, prescribed certain beliefs or rejected them. So they practiced selection in all aspects. That is the exaggeration of this idea of performance, where you prescribe what performance is, so to speak. Yes. So it's no longer natural selection, so to speak. Life begins there and ends there. And in between, I can prove myself. I can be economically active, I can start a family, the family can be bigger or smaller. So what we actually experience in everyday life has been prescribed there. And those are the two extremes we operate in. And since we have now shifted to the ultra-left in our society, especially in Germany, for example here in Europe, I would say that it's not far off Stalinism. The question of whether there will soon be camps and prison sentences for opposition members is already on the minds of many. Yes, that step is not so far off. But that's not what I want to criticize right now. Yes, and why is that? It's because people are being scared into fearing fascists. Nowadays, anything that involves performance selection is considered fascist. So everything that used to be in the middle, in the balance between these two extremes, is also characterized by the fact that performance is evaluated, but you don't go and say, just because you're performing poorly now, you're a bad person. That's what characterizes fascism. Performance selection, school grades, economic existence, prosperity, all these factors that optimize society to make the best use of its resources are frowned upon. And yes, that's a bit critical because we live in a time when we all want to use energy resources wisely. But we see all the regulations that are now being made by the left, by the ultra-left. They are actually less optimized. In fact, we probably consume more energy in the world because of all these bureaucratic regulations that are not properly thought through. Why? Because in the middle, of course, if you ensure that performance is rewarded, that someone who can perform in certain areas which can be very different benefits more from it and can also achieve more, maybe they can start a bigger family. So basically what nature otherwise regulates, that we implement this balance in a form of society, in capitalism, in the social market economy. And since that no longer happens, we have lost our balance, and anyone who talks about performance in any way is immediately labeled a fascist. Well, you can familiarize yourself with the IQs of political leaders in the 1940s. Stalin, as I said, had an IQ of around 120, so he was bright, but not the brightest bulb, and many others had IQs between 120 and 140. Those were the leaders of the time. Germany has slipped to an average of 97 points. And don't imagine that someone with an IQ of 97 can understand someone with an IQ of 120. It's not possible. It's completely impossible. Well, not completely, but it takes some effort. And that's exactly it. So if we don't optimize anymore, we don't optimize our use of energy anymore either. For example, so if we are in the middle, then we optimize the use of energy in our social market economy. Then we optimize society as a whole. And that is what socialism always destroys. That is why such extremes collapse. So we are now, in effect, on a journey into the extremes. At the moment, it's more left-wing here in Europe, but I can already see the movement. Yes, there's always a counter-movement when you lose your balance, and this counter-movement has already begun. The question is, do you really want to go there? Yes, but on the left of the political spectrum, people have been persuaded that they need to be so afraid of those in the middle because, based on performance evaluations, they are fascist. If you move further and further to the left, further and further away from performance, you move toward non-performance, toward absolute egalitarianism, toward herd mentality. And who is persuading people of this? Who is making them afraid? Of course, it's the person who is then automatically recognized as the leader of the herd, because that's the person who knows exactly what to be afraid of. So those are the current social models. And when you look at it that way, you can also explain many of the trends we are currently seeing. They dictated what art should be like. They did it. Leni Riefenstahl's recordings of strength, that's what they were like. Probably the standards that were set back then. And they really enforced the selection process in all areas according to their own ideas. That's why it always backfires. Most of those who are considered right-wing are in the middle. And then people come up with the idea and say, we can't talk to them. What happens then? Then you have this split in society. You have herd mentality. The herd is persuaded. Oh, you're so sure of yourself. Yes, and yet the herd itself is the weakest group. They're not the brightest lights in this herd. In this herd, if they're led by someone who isn't the brightest light, then they're not the brightest. And so you can keep dimming the light. That's what's happening right now. And God forbid we end up in such a situation. What is the solution that then, I almost said naturally, always comes into play? The solution is always brought about by war. Inevitably, such a system with socialism on the left and fascism on the right always leads to war. And that is the desired solution. And if you think about it, you've probably seen old movies where Napoleon's army stands in rows, 2 or 3 rows of soldiers standing next to each other, facing the enemy, and then they shoot at each other and no one flinches. They all stand or kneel there, and then they either fall down when they're hit or they keep going. That's only possible in a society that's incapable of really thinking. So who joined the army back then? It was people who hoped to have something to eat today to have a good life. In quotation marks. They didn't think about the past. They didn't consider what mistakes they had made in the past in order to change something in their lives. That wasn't important to them, just as the future wasn't important to them. Having food, work, recognition, and a uniform here and now, in the here and now, that was important. And for that, they accepted all kinds of hardships because they couldn't calculate the hardships in advance. That's why war is how nature, at least for us humans, resolves such upheavals in extremes. Yes, maybe that will help you in your reflections on where we are right now, what is going wrong everywhere, that no one dares to say anymore, hey, we always need some kind of standard. So have you ever seen, for example, a politician having to take an IQ test or an intelligence test? That would be a start. Yes, no, they go there and say they belong to the party, they're not allowed to run, they're not allowed to be elected or whatever. Or those from the party who know where things are headed. Yes, God forbid we should have such attitudes. And ultimately, when you start to have a golf course and the grass starts to dry out, then even those who are afraid, who don't have the courage, will notice that it's not so great anymore and they'll try to leave. Some very late, some a little earlier. And then those who are left behind will remain behind.